Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks, where we meet with the top thought leaders and strategists in emerging technologies, digital assets, and regulatory landscape and capital markets. I'm your host, Jill Malandrino, and joining me this afternoon, we have Gilliland, CEO of Delinea, Tarun Desikan, EVP of Cloud Secure Edge at SonicWall, as well as Stephen Toland, lead of the Data Privacy Security, White Collar, and Regulatory Law Practice at FBFK. We're here to discuss why the old methods of cybersecurity and that one-size-fits-all access has become outdated in a rapidly evolving environment. It is great to have all of you with us. Art, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Joe.
And this clearly is, I mean, calling it an evolving environment at a rapid pace is kind of an understatement here.
It is. I think the thing that I was interested in obviously is very focused on sort of what is changing in the environment. Obviously, we've been seeing massive growth in this, and you've seen that over the last 2 decades. And I've been working in cybersecurity for 26 years or so now. I think what I've seen more recently is this shift towards focusing on identity security. And the reason that shift is happening, in my opinion, is the companies have actually done a pretty good job of building their protections and the blocking at the edge and on the laptops and so forth. And so what the adversary is doing is just looking for the easiest way in. And so they're stealing a credential, stealing a password. And, what we say is, bad guys don't break in anymore. They just log in. And so there's a big push to focus on that right now.
Right. And Tarun, that's something that you recognize in the 2025 SonicWall Cybersecurity Threat Report, that hackers are exploiting new vulnerabilities, not only in different ways, but much faster ways.
Absolutely. Everyone has this picture of a nation state actor like Tom Cruise in Mission Impossible swooping in with a USB stick into the mainframe. That's just not how the way the world works anymore. What the bad guys have is a list of vulnerabilities. They go after individuals and they go after them regularly. So you're seeing this real rise because everybody has access to the internet. Everybody can attack everybody now.
Yeah. And Stephen, from the legal perspective, not only are you managing the multiple jurisdictions within the US, you also have the other global jurisdictions that you have to constantly be thinking about when you're working and advising clients. What do you perceive the current threat environment as right now?
Well, I agree. First and foremost, this idea of identity is the largest area of threat. And so, we depending on what field you're in, whether it's healthcare, financial, or any field, really, you're going to have all kinds of requirements at the state and federal level to provide the most up-to-date security practices. So that can feel overwhelming to business owners and individuals when they're trying to pick and choose vendors and services. And that's where this idea of platformization or uniformity across is really critical. And then a lawyer can go in after that and kind of assess, all right, which regulations might apply to you after you provide sort of a robust security system uniformly across all of your resources.
Which is interesting because you mentioned uniformity and platformization, but the regulatory environment inherently, because of all the different jurisdictions and how privacy is perceived as an example, across the pond, it makes it challenging to have standardization. What do you mean by being able to platform it?
Well, it is very challenging. I think what you're trying to do, though, is control the things you can control. And so I think one way to look at that regulators all agree on is they would just sometimes they don't know what they don't know. I mean, if you log on to CISA and you see all the safe harbor provisions that are available and all the resources and toolkits available, you'll see that they're almost admitting that they're trying to keep up every day with this stuff too. Cyber criminals seem to always be ahead of the game here. And so what they want to see first and foremost is that you're learning from your mistakes. You're adopting new measures as often as you can without allocating unnecessary resources and things like that. So that's kind of what we mean by that. You have a better chance of eliminating all the gaps, as Art talks about, if you have some type of uniformity across your cybersecurity platform.
Art, let's talk about that for a moment. When you think about good actors and bad actors, they're leveraging the same emerging technologies, AI, as an example. I would imagine that certainly expands the attack surface.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously AI has like tremendous amount of possibilities for organizations to drive more effectiveness within their own use, but it also is empowering the adversary to just attack with greater frequency and much broader. And so this, again, back to the tooling, like at the network and the endpoints, I think we've done a pretty good job. We've instrumented the environment so that you can see a lot. And this is, again, back where, the attack surface on identity, and in particular with AI, each one of those AI robots is going to have an identity And now it's going to be a privileged user inside your environment too, because it can have access to your databases, it's going to have access to your automation, it's going to have access to a bunch of things if you're really trying to build these capabilities in there. And so they're going to use AI tools, they're going to attack your AI tools. And so this is, again, really controlling and locking down and securing AI and using AI as a way to respond so you can automate your responses. So you can go as fast as they are, you can actually protect yourself is going to be super critical as you go forward.
That's a great point, leveraging those types of tools for detection, mitigation, and response. Tarun, when you review 2024, where were the attacks concentrated, or what types of attacks were they concentrated in 2024?
Yeah, I think just to build on Art's point, though, AI is becoming more and more prevalent, but AI is typically just leveraging some of the attacks that we've seen in the past as well. So one of the most common forms of attack we see is business email compromise. We see this in the SonicWall threat reports, where people just get into the user's email. They get into the CEO's email, they're doing wire transfers. If they get into a system administrator's email, they're stealing the API keys. So business email compromise is on the rise, and AI seems to be a tool to impersonate people to get in. And the other one is ransomware. Healthcare, like something like 90% of attacks on any healthcare facility ends up being ransomware. And again, folks are using AI to compromise the device and then install ransomware on it. And so it's the same kind of attacks. AI has just become this accelerator that is driving the types of and the frequency of those attacks through the roof.
Stephen, it's interesting because you had mentioned that healthcare was the most vulnerable area as well. From my understanding, when you think about the way privacy law is constructed around that space, that seems to be one of the more stringent spaces where that's constructed. So why is healthcare so vulnerable? It's coming up in Tarun's data. You're seeing it in your practice.
Yeah. Well, that's a great question. I think the reason is because cyber criminals don't look at the current laws or regulations as sort of prohibitory. What they're looking at is where is the most value. If I'm going to spend effort and energy in some criminal enterprise, they're trying to get some reward from it. And healthcare data, just for lack of not to be flippant, but it has the most bang for the buck, right? If you're a criminal, because you can gain information for financial fraud, for theft. You can also cripple a hospital network just in providing necessary treatment and services, and hospitals incur all kinds of civil liability for that if they can't do what they purport to do for their patients. So they're more apt to pay a ransom faster. And the reality is that cyber criminals rarely are caught. And so there's really little incentive to keep trying and trying for these big fish, so to speak, i.e. the hospital network in that regard.
It's interesting. I'm sorry, go ahead.
There are two kind of main. The hospitals are one because they have to pay quickly, otherwise their services go down. The other one is the crypto exchanges. Cryptography by definition can move around very fluidly, and people are pretty loose with those. So those are the two main areas you see the bad guys going after and infiltrating and making money.
Yeah, and it's very. Oops, sorry.
I'm sorry, go ahead,
It's very similar. Yeah, the reality is this is exactly what Stephen was saying too about the adversaries. It's a marketplace, and so they're actually going after the places that are most value and easiest. And I think historically, hospitals have spent a lot of their technology resources on service and care, and not as much on infrastructure. And so you see sort of the ability to go after sort of either controlled or regulated tooling, like the networks are connected to the MRI machine. And so if you can get access to that, you're not updating the security posture of MRI machines in these machines very often because you have to go through FDA approval. And so there's a lot of challenges that I think healthcare has in defending itself. And then so once you can log in, if you log in instead of breaking in, a lot of the alarms don't work anymore. And so you're literally invisible. And so you're going after identity, you're logging in, you become invisible inside these environments. And that's where you are able to take advantage of some of the challenges that Tarun and Stephen are talking about.
Art, let's stay with that theme for a moment here. This to me sounds like it's more of a business problem versus a security problem. And that makes me think about the evolving role of cyber leadership, because you're competing for all the same resources that every other vertical within the enterprise is, right? So making that case to senior leadership, to the board, these are two very different kind of conversations. You have to know who your audience is. And when you think about it from the CISO's perspective or any senior cyber leadership, you're almost under the CFO function because you're part of risk management, but then you're also under the technology function. You're under the risk management function as well. Then you have to think about all the revenue and product teams that are competing for these resources because they're the ones that are, deriving the revenue to the balance sheet. So as a security professional, how do you see that evolving? How do you have that conversation?
Yeah, look, I'm a security professional, but I'm also a CEO. So I have to deal with this in my own environment. And so when we look at and talk to our teams about how do we allocate resources, because it really is a risk management decision. Now, my product has to be secure. And so a lot of my resources go into securing my product because my product as a SaaS product is essentially my customer's infrastructure. But then we also have to protect our environment. And so how much do you spend and where do you spend it? And it really is a question around risk. And so being able to identify the risk, being able to sort of map out where the threats could come from and what the impact of your business is going to be, that is now the job of the CISO.
Right.
And the CISO has to be able to not only have a technical competence of understanding sort of what controls they should put in place and how to manage the environment, but they also have to have that business discussion with folks like myself that are really looking at, look, I have $100 to spend. How am I going to split it out? Where am I going to put those monies in IT and product development and sales? And so you've got to make that discussion happen at the most senior levels. And so these CISOs have become business operators. They can't just be technical folks down in the basement. They actually have to interact and engage with the senior folks and report to the board. And that is a big job.
It certainly isn't true. And let's ask this another way. So whether it's internal or external facing products, and now the AI is part of the consumer vernacular, especially after the past 2.5 years, is there a concern that there was so much of a rush to be competitive within the enterprise landscape to get these products out, and perhaps risk management or cyber was a fourth, not even a forethought, but was an afterthought when you're thinking about how you're opening up all these, different verticals within the tech stack?
Yeah, I mean, just coming back to the CISO's job, right? A CISO has to be a great salesperson as well. It's not just enough to be a technician. They have to go inside, but sell internally. So again, coming back to the business that's investing in AI and not really thinking about security, if the CISO has to stay on top of it, they have to go to the internal product teams and sell them on adding a security function, understanding the risks. So many businesses today, they roll out these AI products, but they haven't perhaps thought about how the agents start hallucinating. You go to your United app and you ask a question, oftentimes the answer that comes back may have nothing to do with the question itself. So that's just a small risk, but this risk amplifies over time as AI gets more and more powerful, the hallucinations and the using of incorrect data. It's a hard job for the security team. You can't slow down the product innovation, but at the same time, you just have to be aware of the risks. I haven't seen too many CISO organizations really work tightly with product organizations.
Well, part of the challenge is that businesses, whether intentionally or not, remain siloed. And it's really hard to get a grasp on from a bird's eye view what the vulnerabilities and how each business line is thinking about how they're managing their risk. It makes it more challenging for the CFO, for the CISO to get a good look at that.
And the legal
Jill,
people,
I think so I'm sorry. Go ahead, Tarun.
No, I was just saying that the legal folks are the ones who really struggle because a lot of the user-facing interactions have legal and compliance ramifications that neither the product people nor often the security people understand.
I think coming back to the question you asked, Jill, around sort of, is the products getting ahead of security? I wrote a blog a couple months ago just talking about sort of the evolution of new platforms that come out. And so if you think about the new platform as the laptop that happened in the sort of late 90s, if you will, the rush to get the capabilities and the features there outstretched, and the developers didn't focus on the security of the device. They focused on new capabilities. Same thing with cloud. And they're chasing the rabbit again to try to secure the cloud environments and secure pieces. AI is another new platform that's going to be transformational in the enterprise. And what's happening today, and you see this with DeepSeek and the vulnerabilities there's a rush to add new capabilities and new features. And so the resource allocation within the development community isn't about necessarily building the security features, because security is a feature. It has to be planned for, it has to be invested in like a feature. All of the resources that are going into the development now of these platforms is really focused on the new capabilities, the new features that they can sell. And I think security often has sort of a second phase or a third phase, which has candidly created the industry. And it's been good for my career, 25 years working in space, chasing the rabbit, basically trying to secure these platforms. But the reality is that is going to be the challenge we have with AI, is so much investment is going into features. that security has got to be a part of that. And I know that companies are more intelligent now about how they approach it. And so they're more aware of it. Boards are talking about it. CEOs are talking about it. But it is definitely a concern as these new platforms come out.
Which is interesting because we did a panel on Tuesday, I believe it was, and we had a number of consultants on. And what they were discussing was it's no longer just about how we're looking at trying to get a piece of the revenue pie, but the enterprise model itself. Because technology is moving so fast, it's no longer going to be, you know, the AI center of excellence or having the time to study these and have different divisions to, you know, think about innovation, because the model is completely changing due to the speed and part of those cyber issues. We're almost out of time here, but I want to wrap this up with you, Stephen. You made an interesting point about the complexity of catching a cyber criminal. I'm in law school myself, and data and cyber is my track. And one of the most interesting things that I've gotten out of it is from the criminal law perspective, even though it might be treated like an organized crime, it's so challenging because there is no person you can see. And most of the people behind the screens don't even know each other. So it's not like you can connect the dots. Do you think cyber criminal law, that's what's so unique about it relative to, you know, the other criminal verticals of law?
It's a fascinating question. I want to just add something to what Art said that kind of answers your question, Joe, which is that I think we're going to see now, we see that on CISA's sort of site promoting this idea of now security by design, because right now the consumer really shoulders all that burden, and then the provider, the technology provider doesn't. At some point that may shift. I think that could shift only through criminal or civil liability attaching, right? So I think the law at some point would need to sort of ascribe something to those tech providers before they're, as Art points out, like going to be able to sort of allocate resources the other way. But what makes conspiracies very uniform in all our jurisdictions across the United States, federal and most states, that you don't have to know necessarily your co-conspirator. So that part, the law is secure in that area. But what makes it, as you point out, so challenging is just jurisdictional issues, right? Not knowing where these people are, how to find them, how to serve them. And typically what happens in all federal cases, and that's never changed over 50 years, is you just got to catch one of them, right? And then you start putting the pressure on them and their incentives to cooperate. But that's what makes it so difficult. There isn't much of a digital footprint to capture somebody.
All right. Appreciate all of your insights. Great discussion. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.